Hey guys, welcome to the newest episode of NFL 101. Today we're going to be talking about something very interesting, something that I've touched on a little bit before. But before we do that, transition. And again, let me transition again. Alright, so today, as I said before, I'm touching on something I've touched on before. Uh, It's something I think we need to talk. I think I've needed to talk about. That's the wrong app. You know, guys, like you guys know I like my apps, right? Anyway, today we're going to be talking about NFL suspensions and how they work. Now, I have talked about this briefly before in terms of the on-field suspensions and what they look like. Again, I'm going to reiterate that on-field suspensions for the NFL, they do not happen for on-field reasons, unless something really, really egregious. Like it's something that stands out. So, like players fighting. So, so player fights do happen in the NFL, and they can happen for several reasons, whether those players have off the field beef or they rivals from college, high school, and it's just part of the game. So it can happen, but it usually doesn't because of the on field fights. Uh, Something else to know about suspensions is the NFL, like the league, can suspend. So Roger Goodell, as the NFL commissioner, can suspend players, and the individual teams can suspend players. So most of the time, for on-field if a player's suspended for on-the-field reasons, chances are it's probably the team that's suspending them. Well, actually, it's probably the NFL that's suspending them. Now that I think about it. But anyway, um, so when it comes to on-field suspensions, they really don't work. They really don't happen that often for for the reasons I listed above, because most of the time the penalties done in the game are not that egregious. And when they are, it's usually when players get injured. So, player injuries and fights are most often the things that get players suspended, whether by the team or by the NFL. Um, but and just to touch on something, uh, just in case you guys uh, are thinking about it, know the Damar Hamlin situation was not a situation where a penalty or a suspension needed to happen. We've talked about it on the podcast. The What happened to Damar Hamlin was the freakest of freak accidents. Like, we're talking about everything had to happen at the right time, in the right moment, and I hate using the word right, because the guy nearly died, and he was 30 seconds away from being declared dead. But um, that was the freakest of freak accidents, where everything had to happen at an exact time, and it happened. It lined up to happen. So, no, the player he collided with did not need to be suspended, and no, the player he collided with did not need to be penalized for that. Just to give you guys an example of what a penalty doesn't look, of what an injury penalty does look like. However, players like Ndamukong Suh or others who deliberately are stomping on players, or deliberately like twisting their ankles, or when they're already tackled on the ground, those players, those types of injuries may result in suspension for on the field stuff. But again, most of the suspensions happen off the field for off the field reasons, whether that's violating, uh, certain team policies or violating NFL policies. One of the one of the most common ways uh, for a player to get suspended is for using performance enhancing drugs. Um, uh, I can't think of a player right now, but there are several players who have been suspended for for taking certain drugs that enhance their physical performance on the field. Now, that you can be considered an in between type of thing, where it's it's the result is on the field, but they did it off the field. Another common way is now that gambling is illegal, not illegal. Gambling is legal in some states, or is becoming legal in more states, and they're starting to introduce gambling. Gambling is another popular way where players can be suspended for violating the NFL's gambling policy. Um, and yes, there are several policies in place to prevent players from gambling, to prevent players from taking certain drugs, or prevent players from doing certain things. Um, and there's also something called the Commissioner's Exempt List, which basically means basically what the Commissioner's Exempt List is: an indefinite suspension until a concrete suspension can be in place. Um, Deshaun Watson, before his 11-game suspension for his off-the-field legal troubles was decided, was put on the Commissioner's Exempt List until that process was. I believe he was. If he wasn't, no big deal. I don't remember. But anyway, there are certain players who do something off the field, and the commissioner knows right away that they're probably going to be suspended, and he's just like, okay, until we get a definite suspension, like 10 games, 11 games, you are on the commissioner's exempt list um, until we get a definite game and a definite length of suspension. Um, and most of the time, I at least in my experience, I have not. They being put on the commissioner's exempt list does not count towards your overall game suspension. So if you were, say, you were put on the commissioner's exempt list for 2 years for 10 games, and then it comes out that your suspension was for 11 games. That does not mean just because you're on this commissioner's exempt list for 10 games doesn't mean you only. It doesn't cancel out 10 games of your actual suspension. So you're technically serving two different suspensions for 21 games of a season. So that's more than more more games than there are in the season. So you're probably looking at 2 years of where you're not going to be on the field for play. Um, and speaking of the length of the suspensions, they vary in length. They can be for 1 or 2 games to 6 games, up to 11 games, even up to entire seasons where you're just off the field um, for various reasons. Um, Again, the most common ones are the performance enhancing drugs and the gambling, at least in the recent times. There are other policies that, if you do violate them, will get you suspended. Um, and of course, if a player has any legal troubles off the field, like Deshaun Watson and Rashee Rice, the Chiefs' second-year receiver, he could very well be suspended either this season, going into this season, or going into next season for a period of games. We don't know what that will. And of course, another thing to mention about suspensions is you can appeal them. So like any normal court case, like any court case, you can't appeal the length of your suspension. You can't appeal uh, your suspension in general. When that happens, usually players don't wipe their suspension completely off, but they'll get it lessened. So, let's say Johnny Banks gets suspended for 6 games. I don't know if Johnny Banks is a real person. That's just the name that came to me. Let's say Johnny Banks is suspended for 6 games for off the field issues. He appeals it, and he gets the suspension from 6 games down to 3 games. Therefore, he only has to serve 3 games. And like I said before, there is no time served. So if you're out of the league for a certain number of years and then get suspended, that's not those years that you're not playing do not count towards your suspension. So let's take Tom Brady. He's been out of the league now for roughly 2 seasons. Let's say he comes back and gets suspended for 11 games for whatever reason. You guys can pick the reason. Just because he was not playing for the last 2 years does not mean he can just start playing immediately and count those years as you know time served, to use a legal term, for suspension reasons. Uh, Other than that, that's it for suspensions this week. Uh, Catch you guys. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Be sure to if you like the video, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, do a subscribe. And if you the Patreon link should be in the description. Um, there are certain benefits that you could, so take a look at the Patreon if you wish to give us money. Other than that, transition, and I'll see you guys later.